Whenever you're ready.
All right, well, welcome everybody to another exciting edition of our Finance and Facilities Committee meetings. Do we want to talk at all about the budget priorities and process, which is first on our agenda?
I have nothing new for that.
I have a question. After school, what are you guys thinking about after school? We have to put in 75,000 this year. Is this the first year where we start to put money into the program because the Fed grant starts to progressively shrink? Is that accurate?
I think, yes, the 21st century grant is being reduced by about that. And I think we're looking at it kind of more holistically as a program and looking at different funding streams. And I don't think that John and I expect that we'll have to spend general fund money on that this next year.
Okay, my overall point is that we had a great program a long time ago, then we as a school board did not fund it and we lost it. So I just really want to keep our eyes on the prize of keeping that program going
That's
way up into the future.
Yeah, John can nod at this, but I think that's our plan is to make it a sustainable program district-wide.
Correct. That's correct.
So we don't have to carry a line for it in this upcoming budget, but we will in the 22-23 budget.
We're going to have to develop a strategy to incorporate the whole program cost eventually into the general fund budget, whether it's 2 years from now or 3 years from now, and what that looks like, whether it's like it is this year, which is 3 schools, or like it might be in 3 years, which might be 6 schools, or some combination of the two.
I thought the grant had the potential to be renewed. Have we explored that at all?
We will. That will be a funding stream. So we could renew this, but it will still have the same kind of sunsetting provision. So yes, we could theoretically renew it at the same $300,000 level, and that would help us sustain it. And I think that the goal of the grant really is to make it sustainable. So I think that if they see our plan and if they see us expanding it beyond what their minimum requirements are, I think that we're in a pretty good place to get the second round, get it approved again.
And the cost of the full program is 400,000?
300,000. 300,000 is what we spent on the grant, and we haven't quite spent all of that in fiscal 20. I'm not sure where we stand right now in 21.
Is there any conversation about, I know, so they've made some changes because of COVID, and so they're not just offering after school programming, but some in-school extra tutoring. Is there any conversation about including that in as more long-term post-COVID?
That would be John or Stephanie would be having that discussion. But I think yes. I think that again, we're looking at the whole thing holistically as kind of something to supplement our regular ed programs.
So to Lauren's point, do we need to put $75,000 in the budget?
No.
Okay.
How is it being funded this year then?
For next year?
Yeah, right.
We suspect that we can use COVID money, some of the ESSER money, to supplement that and maintain the programs, if not expand them.
But it will keep their budget more or less whole, even though they're seeing a reduction in the grant.
I think, again, John can chime in, but we're looking at this holistically, and we're having those discussions right now to see how we can really, make this an important part of our, long-term strategic vision of educating the students.
I believe that we can fully fund the program next year without hitting the general budget, at least for this year. We may have to phase it in, but I think with the COVID money and some of the requirements for supporting extended learning opportunities with that money, I think we can certainly tap into that stream without hitting the general budget for this year, at least.
Yep.
John, can I ask you a quick question about that? So I guess it's COVID-4, right? So what we're calling it, the COVID-4 money. So that got greatly reduced down from what I in the email I sent you. But I guess the question I would have, and I don't know if anybody knows the answer, is it possible to use that COVID-4 money for this year's summer program and save the money that we were going to spend on it?
Can you expand on that for this year's federal program? What do you mean?
Yeah, so I'm assuming when maybe I'm screwed up on this because I get mixed up with contracts, but when does our new school year start? Is it July 1st or August 1st for money?
July 1st.
July 1st. So we're going to have our summer program in July of 2021. We don't have a lot of money in there for that, I don't think. I know there's going to be COVID-4 money for summer school, very small amount. So the question I have is, we already budgeted for this year, I believe, or we didn't spend all the money we had last year. It was a very small amount of money. I want to say it's like $10,000, but I could be wrong. It wasn't very much money. I'm thinking that we could use COVID-4 money, which is coming from this $1.9 trillion package, to do summer school for this year, if it's in the New Year's budget.
We can use the COVID money for summer school. Is that the answer to your question?
For this coming July.
Yes, we can.
Well,
we can use COVID money for summer school. That's my answer.
right now, using our designations, we have COVID-1 money, which is 600,000. That's in the bank. We have COVID-3 money, 2.5, P 2.4, that's in the bank. And then COVID-4 money is coming in eventually. The state is putting what, 411 million into K-12 education. So we'll find out at some point how much RSU 13 gets, but it's on top of the 3.1. I think it's 3.1, Pete, that we have basically in the bank right now.
And Doug, when you're saying summer school, you're talking about the summer camp that was discussed at our last meeting.
Correct.
Okay, not anything additional to that.
No.
Okay. Okay, any further on any of this? Okay. Well, then in that case, I'd like to welcome Janet Corcoran, our Director of Special Education. Janet, the floor is yours. Pete, do you need to allow her to share her screen?
Yes.
And thanks for coming, Janet.
Yeah. So while we're figuring that out, let me know when I'm all set, Pete.
You're all set.
You're all set. All right. So I'm going to be just kind of sharing an update on special ed at RSU 13 with you, and I have to just move your faces so I can get to the present screen. There we go. I can still see you. You're just oddly spaced. So as I'm going through this, I cannot see all of you. So if you have a question, just speak up and I will stop and answer that for you. The goal today was for me to just give a brief overview, and also there were some questions that had come up at board meetings. So I'm touching upon a couple things from that, and then to go over some goals we have for next year. And again, just pipe up if you have any questions. So one of the questions I've heard come up is questions about our audit results. So as you know, we were audited last year, and we had our results back actually over the summer. And there were 7 identified areas of need. So I actually met with the monitoring team with Jess Yates on September 11th. We actually closed out our action plan at that moment. And I had a chance to talk to the monitoring team about the audit process, which I was only a part of as a case manager. So we had 7 areas of need. They shared with me that is actually very good. A lot of districts have 30 to 4 areas of need. I've listed them on the screen. They're all related to writing paperwork, so not planning for students. These are paperwork areas. So we have, I don't know if you want me to go through them in any detail. I know you can see them on the screen and you can ask questions, but all of these were resolved on September 11th, but we have continued training and giving feedback to staff throughout the year to address these. And there's been significant improvement in all 7 areas. So if we were to have the audit again today, I feel confident that we would not have any of these areas of need. Our staff has worked very hard to work on all of these areas. Does anybody have any question about these, or would you like me to read them through?
I don't think you need to read them. And this is a state audit. They do this on some sort of regular basis.
They do every 4 years. So we're good for a few more years. And again, it's a very intense process. We send them some of our paperwork. They come in and do a visit in many cases. Jess Yates actually invited them to come do a visit because after seeing our paperwork, they had told her they didn't need to come do a visit, and she invited them anyway because it's Jess and she's awesome. And then we had these 7 areas of need, which again were resolved by September 11th.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's great.
Yeah.
Is
But I know
there
there you are. Go ahead, Chelsea.
is there a significant staff part in doing this, or are these things that they're easily able to work into their existing schedule?
So this is part of everything, part of the paperwork. So this is whenever we have an IEP meeting for every student, these are pieces of that paperwork. The training that I have done and that Jess did before me, for Jess, she actually did a video and showed it to staff. My training is all in the individualized when I'm getting IEPs back from staff. And then if I notice a specific area at a specific school or with a specific person, I address that. But again, we've seen significant growth in all of these areas.
Yeah, a quick answer to your question, Chelsea, is almost all paperwork is burdensome, just to be clear.
Yeah.
You got to do what you got to do, but yeah.
Well, the question is, does it get more and more burdensome to a point that it becomes impossible every time we get an audit?
It is a lot, but I think the case management model that we have at RSU 13 makes it manageable, or more manageable than in other districts that do not have that model. So
yeah, that's a really good point. We've instituted that 2 or 3 years ago, and I can see exactly how our special ed staff would love that is happening. That is a great thing.
Yeah, and I think
And by
go ahead.
And by that, do you mean that we have one person who specifically deals with the paperwork?
So the case manager does a large portion of the paperwork. Teachers, service providers still write goals for each of their students to rate the needs. So there's a piece of every IEP that the teachers still do because they are the people working directly with the student. But the case manager does a majority of the paperwork, schedules meetings, deals with a lot of the logistics. So that frees our teachers up to actually deal with instruction to help students make progress on those goals. So it's a real team effort. It's very collaborative. And I will say having the case managers has also provided an extra layer of feedback to service providers because I can work more one-on-one with the case managers. Their schedules are more flexible. So then I can provide training to them, which they can then provide in their schools. So overall,
Good, thank you.
yeah.
I was just going to follow up. It's really interesting to see how few areas there are, and also that they're not instructional areas, that it is, I don't want to say the paperwork is minor or not important, but it's sort of very easy technical things to quickly make adjustments to.
So we're doing what we need to do. We need to capture it in the paperwork. But again, we've made amazing progress on that. So it was a really good result. And the monitoring was actually very impressed by our district. So, which was nice for me to see. That was my first day. So then I know that Jess has showed this to you probably every year, just having watched board meetings. And as a matter of fact, this is an old graphic. So if you look really closely at it, if you squint your eyes, you can see Guilford Butler on there. But the continuum itself has not changed. So when you're looking at the continuum of services, obviously we start with 100% in the regular classroom. Those are our regular education students, our 504 students, students who are receiving consultation services. Then as you become more restrictive, so 80% in the classroom, 40 to 79% in the classroom, that's where you see your resource room, your speech services. The even more restrictive, so less than 40% in the regular classroom, that would be your life skills programs, which is the program for our students with significant cognitive disabilities, and also our self-contained behavior programs. 0% is out of district or homebound hospital. So I might refer back to this. Does anybody have any questions about this? I know most of you have seen this before, probably.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear that these percentages are the time that a student spends in the classroom, not a number of students in each.
It's the time they spend with their non-disabled peers. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Janet, I got it mixed up. I know that some of these kids become violent, and I was curious about the students that don't spend a lot of time in the classroom. I'm sure we have, and I don't know what they are. We have procedures to handle that. I mean, we see horror stories all the time about, police coming in and, handcuffing like little kids and stuff like that. What do we do when children get out? I mean, I know that you have to keep the other kids separated from them, but I don't know much more. Do we have a policy, or not a policy, but do we have a procedure that we follow with each child? I mean, so I'm sure some of it's repetitive.
I'm going to give like your typical special ed response here, but it really is individualized and it depends on the student. So when we have students in those programs, they all have behavior plans. And so it largely depends on that behavior plan and then school policy. So
Well, are they isolated from the other kids for a certain period of time?
Sorry, say that one more time.
I'm sorry, are they isolated from the other kids for a certain period of time? So I'll give you an example, okay? This is one that comes to mind. When I was in elementary school, we had a kid who strangled one of my students in school, okay? He's out of control, he strangled a kid. The kid was suspended for like 2 weeks. We don't do that. So what do we do?
It really depends on the student. You're going to love this answer. It really depends on the student. So some students might have, they're temporarily, so for the behavior room program, you're not going to like my answer because it's really going to depend on the student. There might be cases where the student has a behavior plan where they would go back to the behavior room. There might be a behavior plan where there's also a crisis plan where we contact the police. So it really depends upon the student. The goal is always to avoid that from happening.
Well, I don't care what the policy is. I just want to know what we do.
Yeah, it's individualized based on students and then the school policy. We have a lot of meetings, Doug, on a regular basis where I talk with the IEP teams and principals and we come up with these plans.
Well, I guess I'm actually more concerned about the other kids and the teachers and stuff in the classroom if a child gets violent. And I'm assuming that.
I mean, there are plans, Doug, where we might have to clear a room. I haven't really seen much of that actually have to happen.
Okay, but they would probably be in that more red zone is what I'm thinking.
They would be in the red zone, and usually there's antecedent behaviors. So we know when something is coming before it actually happens, and then we can put in play that behavior plan. So for example, we might notice that a student is clenching their fists, and that's a sign that something is about to happen. So then we have a plan in place that when we see that, we take these steps to put the child in a place. Maybe they're going back to North Star or Nautilus or one of the other programs so that they can calm down and then rejoin the classroom. So the goal is always to have the student be able to participate as much as possible and to avoid those behaviors by happening by really individualizing a plan to the student.
And the last question on that, do we suspend kids anymore for that?
In general, yeah, I know we do suspend students, but again, there's a process when it's a special ed student that we have to follow.
But they can be suspended though.
You can suspend a student, yes, for behavior, but if it's a special ed student, you would then have to have, depending on the length of the suspension, there's certain steps we have to follow.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Did that answer that? John, did you want to add anything?
No, I don't think so. I mean, they're covered by our regular policies, the restraint and seclusion policy, and each student has their own individualized plan. So there is no one cut and dried anything that we do. It's a number of techniques, a number of plans, and a number of situations that we deal with. So we do everything we can. Safety, of course, is our #1 priority.
Yeah.
And yes, a special education student can be suspended. It's just there are additional steps that we have to take after that.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Any other questions before I move on? So obviously last year, I was not the special ed director. We were able to pull some numbers just for comparison's sake. So October 1st is when we have our child count report every year. On October 1st of 2019, we had 361 students that were receiving special education services. Last year, 7 special education students graduated, 35 special education students left the district, and 41 transferred into the district. So when we compare that, and we have obviously more numbers this year, I'm just going to move this box so I can see them. Come on, just a second. Sorry, John, I'm moving you to the bottom of my screen. So as of the child count this year, we had 336 students receiving special education services. At this point, it's closer to 322. So a lot of the data that I pulled recently, I put dates on things so you could see what that is. Right now, we're closer to 322. We have 11 special education students that are projected to graduate. 25 child development services at CDS students are expected to start next fall, but obviously referrals are ongoing. 26 special education students have left the district so far. 28 students have transferred into the district so far. We have dismissed 12 students from services, and 12 have been identified as requiring special education. And we've had 10 students unenrolled to homeschool. Actually, there were 12, but 2 of them returned, I believe, in January. And then as of right now, actually, probably the number's already gone up today, but we have had 592 IEP meetings, most of those via Zoom, and we are on track to exceed 900. The biggest year that I'm aware of was back in 2017 when we had 818 meetings in a year. So we are having quite a few meetings this year, as I would have expected due to the circumstances.
Janet?
Yep.
So first, I want to remind folks that it's really a positive thing when a student is dismissed from services.
Oh, yeah.
Even though it doesn't sound like that. And then my question is, do we keep track of why students are leaving and coming into the district? I'm just curious as if we're like, if people are leaving because they think they get better services elsewhere, or they're just moving, or whatever the reasons are.
Yeah, we do keep track. I don't think we've had any, I'm not aware of anybody leaving due to service this year. It's usually because their home situation has changed. They've moved to another location and they've transferred schools.
Thank you.
And then I also wanted to add that we've had 29 referrals to special ed this year, so 13 of those are still pending. And now I'm going to get into some statistics because I know you all love pie charts. So here we go. So this one, and I believe we sent the slides out to you, so I don't know how well you can see this, but I will tell you that this is very much in line with the state's numbers. So this is just a breakdown of our numbers by disability within the district. If you look at the pie chart, you can see that specific learning disability, which is the red, is by far the greatest learning disability that we see at RSU 13, so 33%, followed by other health impairment, which can include things like ADHD, Tourette syndrome. So that's 24. Speech language is the next at 17%, and that's followed by emotional disturbance and then autism. Go ahead, Doug.
What's emotional disturbance?
An emotional disturbance can be a lot of things, but I'm trying to think of a clear way. So if somebody's diagnosed with anxiety, if they're diagnosed with anything that would be considered an emotional disturbance, and there's a form that we have to kind of go through, there's steps we have to go through in order to make that eligibility decision.
I assume it's mostly anxiety and depression.
Mostly anxiety and depression. We rule out things like social maladjustment and other things.
Do many of these kids have more than one? I assume they would.
Say that one more time. Let me go back.
So in other words, like, yeah, so like, for example,
So if you look at, there's multiple.
they have more than one. They have more than one category. So
our multiple disabilities is at 4%.
okay, so no. The answer is no.
So a lot of times you might see a student with, for example, specific learning disability that also has ADHD. But when we qualify students, we're looking for the primary adverse effect on their education.
And what would be the other health impairment? What would that it's kind of a catch-all thing, so I'm curious.
Other health impairment is like a chronic illness, or so we look at things like ADHD, Tourette's, so the ADHD being the most common.
But migraines could be, right? Something like that.
Yep. A lot of health concerns can be asthma, but usually when you see things like that, they fall under 504, not necessarily special education.
Mm.
Move on to the next one. And since I clicked it already, you can see that next we're going to be going into numbers by school. Let me just move. So I can no longer see your faces because I want to be able to see the slides. So if you have something to say, please just speak right up. So starting with Ash Point. And again, these numbers were taken, March 1st, 2021. So we have at that point, and this was pulled from Power School, we had 170 students in the school. 16 of them were identified as special education, which is 9.41% of the population. 4 of those were speech only, 12 were resource. We have a special education teacher there, 1.5 educational technician positions. I think one of them is also half-time general ed. And then we have speech, OT, PT, and social work as assigned. Cushing, 59 students, 10 of those are identified as special education, so that's 16.95%. 5 of those are speech, 5 are resource. So we have a half-time special education teacher. The other half-time, she's actually doing academic evaluations for the district, which is very helpful. We have 1 educational technician, and then speech, PT, social work as assigned. Thomaston Grammar School has 161 students. 41 of those are identified with special education. That's 25.47% of the population. So just remember that number when we go to South School. Speech, there are 9 speech-only students. The resource room, there are 18. We do have a behavior room program there. There are 6 students in that program, and we have a life skills program there, and we have 8 students. There are 3 special education teachers, 14 ed techs. We have a nurse that works with a student, and then we have speech, OT, PT, and social work as assigned. They also have a case manager that's also shared with other programs.
If you're a second grader in Cushing with life skills challenges, you go to Thomaston Grammar, right?
That is correct.
So those numbers, they don't mean Thomaston. They mean the kids
Thomaston
going
Grammar.
there. Yeah, because speech only and resource would be specific to Thomaston kids, but behavior and life skills are for that age group from different schools.
Thomaston Grammar has a behavior program, and so does South School.
And so does South. Okay.
Ash
Right.
Point and Cushing do not.
Right. So those kids would be going to either Thomaston or Rockland. Yeah.
That is correct. Yep.
So with 14 ed techs, is that because we have some ed techs who are working like with 1 student dedicated, or?
We do have that because we have the life skills program in that school, and we also have the behavior room program at that school. We do have some students that have one-on-ones. We do try to keep a 1 to 2 ratio when possible for those programs, but we do have some students that require one-on-ones.
Thanks.
And we have seen a slight increase in that as the year has gone along. All right, so that's 25.47 for Thomaston Grammar. South School, we have 274 students with a total special ed population of 69 students, which is 25%. So the percent, even though they have more students, their percent based on their population is slightly less than Thomaston Grammar School. They have 21 speech only, 30 resource room students, 13 students in their 2 behavior programs. And then they have the NEC program, which is the New England Center for Children Cooperative Program at their school.
What is that?
Go ahead. Did somebody say something?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Doug, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
What is NECC? What is that?
So that's the New England Center for Children. So that is a program that's really based on the principles of applied behavior analysis. And in this case, it's a cooperative program. So we run the program with their assistance, and we have a BCBA from that program. And it's for students who have a diagnosis of autism or related disabilities. It is a self-contained program, but we do try to mainstream as much as possible.
Has the TGS percentage gone up? Because I don't remember it being as close to South, and that could just be I didn't notice.
I feel like that it has. I haven't seen the numbers from last year, but I believe from the numbers I have seen from previous years, that is an increase. And again, part of that is because they have our life skills program, and because they have a behavior room program that we get students from Cushing and or Ash Point, depending. Although I will say most of the students go to South School.
Jane, can I have a quick question about the education technicians? Are
Sure.
those mostly the one-on-ones that you have?
Not necessarily. I mean, we do have one-on-ones, and we have, you know, our students in life skills who need a lot of support. and the behavior room, but we also have resource rooms and that we run, that we have students who need support in those programs as well. But the majority of them are in our self-contained programs.
Another question, hold on. There we go. The students who moved from homeschool, do you know offhand what schools they came from?
I don't, but I can find that out for you.
I'm just curious because I'm interested in this TGS South School, but just because I have heard that South School has the most challenges, and it's interesting to me that that's kind of changed. So yes, thank you. I'd be interested in that.
Yeah, I can find that out for you because I actually have that information. I just didn't put it in this. I'm just writing myself a note, Chelsea, so I remember.
So
Again, go ahead.
back to life skills then. So you're not showing a life skills category at South.
There's no life skills program at South.
So our life skills program for elementary school students is at TGS, period.
That is correct.
Right? And the NEC program is at South, period. That's it, right?
There's the cooperative program at South, and then there's the partner program at the middle school.
Yeah. Okay.
But for the elementary, yes.
Again, those two things kind of skew the numbers. We just have to keep that in mind as we look at and compare, how kids are doing in our different schools. So,
And if you ever would like, I can definitely break that down so you can see where those students are located, what towns they're coming from.
yeah.
I kind of got a stupid question, Jan, because I'm not very bright, I guess, when it comes to asking this, but I understand like when they get to high school, I mean, we have life skills and I could even envision it in middle school, but I'm having a hard time envisioning that in elementary school, just because they're so young. I don't know if that means anything or not, but I mean, what would we be teaching? Things like how to wash your hands, how to,
It could be. Again, it's individualized, and you keep in mind that when students are in their program usually have an intellectual disability, so that is something that can be diagnosed young.
Well, I mean, I can see things like personal hygiene and things like that. I'm just trying to think what else,
They teach academics. They teach a wide range of things based on where the children are and individually. So you have to keep in mind that even within that program, there's a wide range of skill levels.
No, I mean, I get that. I think I don't think I've told you, I've told some of the members on the school committee that I have a niece who has a son that is disabled, totally disabled. He'll never function above like 4 years old, 5 years old, and he's like 11. And he stays in the same class all the way through elementary school. He never changes. And when he goes to middle school, they keep him in the same class. And he has very, very limited, he'll always have the brain of a 4-year-old. He'll never, no matter what happens.
So just keep in mind, first of all, it's individualized. And second, whenever there's a chance for us to put those students in with their non-disabled peers in those settings, so maybe a classroom or, an allied art, we do that. So it's individualized. And just because they are in the life skills program does not mean they spend their entire day in that program.
And again, using Cushing as an example. So let's say you're a third grader and you have a diagnosis about autism. Where are you going?
It depends. You could be going to the TGS life skills program. You could be going to NEC at South School. You could be staying right at Cushing in the resource room, or you could be completely mainstreamed.
Okay.
Because you don't require special education services to access your education.
Okay.
So it depends on the student. So when I say it depends on the student, it really does.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. And behaviorally, is the goal with the behavioral difficulty that we try to get them into the mainstream classroom as much as possible?
Yes.
Again, individualized every
Yes.
time. I get that, but yeah. Okay.
Because we definitely want students to be able to access their education, access the general education curriculum, and be with their non-disabled peers as much as possible.
Right. And to answer, I think something, Doug, you're bringing up is that we also have to keep in mind the safety of their peers and the staff in the room. So it's always a balancing act, right, Janet, to know about kids with behavioral difficulties and if and when they should be in the classroom.
Yeah. And again, we have meetings and we look in depth at each student's needs and create programs and often change them depending on what's going on with the student.
The thing about anxiety in kids is that Some kids with horrible anxiety difficulties, they show it in really challenging behavior like anger.
Mhm.
So that's a diagnostic issue that is got to be kind of challenging because kids don't talk, they act.
So Jan, one of the things I always face with the taxpayer is we have a $9 million special education budget.
Mhm.
And they always ask me to explain why is it so expensive? And, clearly we hire a lot of employees to do this. We do, given the total number of students that we actually have in the program, which is not that great when you compare it to, the rest of the school district.
Mhm.
I assume though it's higher than most schools. I'm guessing that it is.
Yeah, it's higher than our average is higher than the state as well.
Yeah.
Although it is
how much
closer
is-
than it has been in the past. So we're at 20, close to 21%, and I think the state average right now is at close to 19.
I would have thought it'd be even lower than that.
So
21 is lower than before for sure.
it is, and the state is higher than it was before. So
Doug, let me give you a hint. What I say to people, it's just like no child chooses to have a disability. Second thing is, we're doing what we feel is right. And the third thing is we're also required by federal law. So all things are true. And I know that taxpayers look at it and go, oh my goodness, but all three answers are good answers. They're all on target.
and we do carefully consider resources. Always, can we pull resources from within the school district that we already have?
Well, just to follow up on Lauren's comment, is it possible to get a number as to how much the Fed is funding the mandated services that we provide?
That sounds like a good Pete question.
I agree.
Just to jump in front of Pete, is that I'm not sure that we can identify it in our district, but I know the state always has numbers around that, like what percent the Fed is funding for our state program.
Yeah.
I know it's really low, and I want people to understand that one of the reasons that it's a local cost is because the federal government it's an unfunded mandate from them.
Mhm.
Yeah, if the federal government actually funded it the way they should be, the way it's, I think, authorized or something, the result to taxpayers would be unbelievably great. And just incredible if they actually funded it. I think it's 40% we're supposed to, but they funded it, like a 13 or something small.
It's very frustrating for sure.
Yeah, very frustrating.
And just and if the money flows from the Fed to the state funds it using the EPS formula, which we know doesn't fund some of our towns at all,
Yeah,
no matter what the special ed costs were.
yeah,
And even the towns that do get subsidy, they're under subsidized because of our high property value in those towns. So
right.
we are going to get in our district shortchanged no matter how much that percentage is until the distribution method of those funds is fixed.
Mhm.
I do have some, I don't know if you want the numbers from the other, I found an old slide from an old presentation with the old percentages by school.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing so you can pop it up if you want to.
Okay. It's just,
Before you go, Jan, a quick question. I know Pete's got something important to say. Middle school, we didn't talk about that.
Oh yeah, I'm just letting Pete pop this up and then I'll finish up. I just have a few more slides.
Okay, sure. Okay.
I did not forget the middle school. I promise you.
All right, thanks.
it's not that important, but it just addresses the schools and the percentages. And this goes through fiscal 17, 18, 19, and 20. You can see that TGS and South have been, neck and neck in their percentages, as high as 29 or 30 for both of them. But TGS has always been a school that hosts a large percentage of special ed students.
Pete, has there been any conversation about pulling special ed costs out of EPS? Because we've had no luck on the EPS front, but that seems like a really doable goal, is just to consider special education costs differently for all of the reasons that we've talked about for years.
I'm not aware of any talk. I think that the talk has always been using the formula, which has been, it has been increasing our subsidy for those towns. So for Southern Maine, it works. For communities that are not RSUs, that go for wealthy RSUs, such as Camden Rockport, who get no subsidy, it works because the special ed overrides the subsidy calculation in those communities.
Wait, how does that work that it doesn't work for us?
Because ours flows through because they measure it. So if your RSU gets subsidy, then it flows through the subsidy formula. If your RSU does not get subsidy, it's the only methodology is to override the formula, which gives you 0, and allocate the money separately. So if you look through the Camden Rockport ED 279, you'll see that their only subsidy is the special ed allocation. Ours is added to our total required local and distributed through each town. And if the town is wealthy, they don't get subsidy for us. This is what I call the marriage tax. This is, RSUs that, like 5 and 50, follow the rules, are getting penalized by the use of some of these formulas.
Are you saying like if you're Cape or Camden, you're getting what you need for special ed because it's based on your need, because you're not basing it on the funding formula?
They're getting the full amount of they're getting the full benefit of the special ed. So are MSUs. If you look at St. George, the reason why they got subsidy when they left was because of special ed. They didn't get it here, but they do there. There's even the financial incentive to withdraw because of some of these nuances in the distribution formula.
So they're getting, sorry, Elsie, they're getting a lot or something or what they need or whatever is the right phraseology at St. George for special ed.
They're getting their share.
That we're providing.
They're getting their share.
Can I offer my insight on that particular question, though? It may be beneficial to withdraw if you're a particular town, but it's not always beneficial to withdraw. And I will give the example of Belfast, who withdrew and found their special education costs up over $1 million as a result of the withdrawal. Because similar to Rockland, they're a county seat, and that's the way the funding goes. So they've got a high percentage of special education students, just like we do. So I don't want to put out there that it's advantageous in all cases to withdraw. It is not.
No, in very few cases.
So St. George, like a Northport, it might be advantageous for them to withdraw from an RSU, but a county seat and a service center like Rockland or Belfast, it is clearly not advantageous to do that. So I just wanted to make that clear.
So Pete, you've talked a lot about how the EPS is a zero-sum game. If special ed were split out, would it change how Camden Rockport gets special ed or the Southern Maine towns?
I'd say yes.
So because the pie would get
It's the
split.
same pie.
Would get split, so they would lose. So it's not something that we could promote as a way to equally share costs.
It'd be a tough sell.
You could promote it.
I don't bother if I'm not going to be successful.
Sorry,
All right.
Jane.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the middle school because I know
Yes.
Doug wants to see the middle.
But I do have one question. Pete, do you know like approximately how much of the budget for St. George or for Camden is covered by their federal money?
I don't, but I can research that while Janet's finishing her presentation.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Please proceed, Janet.
All right. Can you, if I move your, there you go. Can everybody see this now?
Yes.
All right, awesome. So at the middle school, so we have 361 students, 84 are special ed. That's a percent of 23.27%. We have 6 speech only. We do have a resource room. We have 59 in that program. The behavior, we have a split behavior program. So there's 15 students. We have the Partner NEC program. So again, that's the New England Center for Children's Partner Program. Students who are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder or related disability. We have 8 special education teachers, 1 special ed case manager, and actually there's another case manager that works in specific programs, 18 educational technicians, 1 social worker, and then speech OT and PT as assigned.
Janet, do you
They
think
do
that,
not have a life skills program. Well, they do have a life skills program. They don't currently have any students in it.
oh, okay. The behavior percentage of special ed in the middle school seems a smaller percentage than in elementary schools as total. I'm just trying to put that together in my head.
So keeping in mind, as we're working with students who are in a behavior room program, we're trying to get them out of a behavior room program.
Yeah.
So
okay.
in theory, you should see the numbers go down.
Yeah. Yeah.
The goal is
Okay.
always to move those students into resource room or just to mainstream.
Right. Right.
Well, I think if you take the total population of the whole district, Lauren, I think that's probably accurate because some schools don't have as high a population of special ed students.
Yeah. It's just interesting to look at.
You got Cushing, you got Ash Point, you thrown in the mix there as well.
Yeah.
I'm going to go on to the high school. So at Oceanside High School, we have 511 students. 105 of those are special ed students. That's 20.55%. We have 1 speech only student. Again, that's another category where you'll see the numbers dwindle as the students' ages go up. 75 students in resource, 17 in our behavior room. So we have 2 programs at the high school. And then we have 12 in our life skills program. 8 special education teachers. We have 2 case managers working at the high school, 15 ed techs, 1 social worker, and then we have speech, OT, and PT as assigned.
I always forget the names of the programs at the high school. They're named.
So we have the North Star program is the only one that we've named, sorry.
That's the only one. And
Yeah,
that's
so-
one of the behavior programs, right?
Yeah, at the middle school, we have Phoenix and we have the Atlas program. So Atlas is basically resource room / life skills when we have life skills students, and it's a way to transition students from the behavior programs back into resource room or less restrictive environments and
Yeah.
vice versa. So it's an extra layer of support, which has actually been incredibly helpful this year.
Okay.
So Jan, forgive me for asking this stupid question again. I'm not sure exactly what high school kids do in the resource room. I'm not sure.
It depends. You love this. I know you love this, but it depends on the student. So
Okay, that's great answer.
students' individual needs. So some students might do just reading. That might be the only thing that they're working on in the resource room.
Yeah.
And they might only do that for 15 minutes, 3 times, per week. And then you have another student that might have a replacement ELA class, although we try to really avoid that. And you have another student that has math, writing, and reading 75 minutes 5 times bi-weekly. So we might have some student that needs just executive functioning skills. So it depends upon the student, with the goal always being to have them with their non-disabled peers as much as possible.
All right. So with the life skills program, these kids have more disabilities. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Yes. So we have, generally speaking, that would be your students with intellectual disabilities, but
Okay.
there's a few others.
Not
categories.
physical disabilities, just intellectual disabilities.
It could be both, but usually the intellectual disabilities is, and then they might also have physical disabilities.
What is a social worker role in the high school for special ed?
For special ed, she primarily works with our North Star program, but she also does work with students who are resource room students who require social work services.
So I guess
So she's, wherever we have an IEP that says social worker in it, that's her at the high school.
I guess I generally think of social work as being something very different. I don't know. I guess I'm struggling with just definition.
Let me help you with that.
Yeah, thanks.
Right. So social workers are often thought of as child protective workers, and that's the classic sort of thing. And then case managers and social workers are thought of similarly as the same thing. And then there's clinical social workers like me and Jessica Falconer, who is the social worker at the high school. We have clinical training and clinical licenses, and we provide mental health services. So social worker means a lot of different things at different times. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. That makes perfect sense. So,
But definitely she is invaluable at the high school. So
And Jan, could you just enlighten me on the population? It's about, 20% of the high school roughly.
mhm.
Is that pretty common for us over the years?
There's been some variation, but I think it's held pretty steady. I think Pete's graph chart that he showed from a presentation a few years ago, you'd see it goes back and forth, but it hovers around that.
And how much of that do you think is dictated by the federal government?
Are you talking about the percent of students or are you talking about funding?
No, not the funding, the students. Like, how do you classify them? Is it all by the federal government? Is that how, like, the reason I think about it is I'm trying to think of, like we have that program at the high school, Jobs for Maine Graduates, right? And it
Yes.
seems to be like maybe I'm missing, but I sit on a scholarship committee and I review their scholarships and how they compare with other kids, and we give scholarships to those kids. So, I mean, clearly, some of them are doing pretty well overall, but they could end up as maybe some of these other special ed needs, like resource, for example. A child might not be good at math, and he could be in the Jobs for Maine programs, and he's trying to learn how to do a skill or something like that, to go to trade school or whatever it is.
Mhm.
So, I'm not really truly understanding, I guess, the sole purpose of the resource room, but how it relates to the everyday things. Like, I know the difference between life skills. I'm not so sure what the behavior issues are, but I think the behavior issues would be related to something intellectually, is what I'm thinking.
So when you have a student who's in a resource room, it can be a number of things. You can have a large number of them have specific learning disabilities. You will also have students who have emotional disturbance, but they're not in a behavior room because they don't need that. You can have students with physical disabilities. You can have students with intellectual disabilities. So resource room can be, I can't think of one of the disabilities that can't be captured or have a student in that setting. It's more about the setting than it is the disability.
Okay. So it's about the setting. So if I'm just use myself as an example, and I'll use my words for what I'm trying to say. Let's just say, for whatever reason, I'm a slow learner. It might be due to my eyesight. It might be due to my intellect. It might be due to something else. But I'm a slow learner, so I need additional help. I'm in the resource room to get that help, right?
Well, first you'd have to be identified with a disability, because there are students who are slower learners, who have complicated learning needs, who do not have a disability, and so therefore they would not be identified as special ed and they wouldn't be in the resource room.
So if I have it, for example, like right now, I have
But if you had a specific learning disability, for example.
a specific learning disability. But let's just say my specific learning disability is I have a hard time hearing.
Okay, so that would be just a hearing impairment.
That's a hearing impairment. So
Yeah.
I would not be in special ed.
You might be in special ed if you needed assistance in the resource room. Maybe you need help with executive functioning skills or something along those lines. But you might also have a hearing impairment and have a 504 plan, or you might also have a hearing impairment and have neither of those things. It really depends on your ability to access and then benefit from your education.
And so a 504 plan, as I understand it, is a normal student.
So a 504 plan is a student who has a disability but needs accommodations, but they do not need direct services.
Okay.
Critical difference. Accommodations
So
are a
so
wonderful thing.
Yeah, so we really take this into account, like, very carefully. When we have meetings where we're discussing eligibility, we spend a lot of time. There's specific questions we have to ask. We have to ask if a student has a disability, is there adverse effect on their education? And then the last and very critical question is, do they require special education to benefit from their education, special ed services, or can they access it with accommodations? And we spent a long time discussing that at those meetings. And if a student does not require specially designed instruction to benefit from or special education services to benefit from their education, we do not find them eligible. We provide other supports.
Okay, so last question. This will not be a very clear thing for me to explain, but I know of a student at the high school, not now, but a past student, who basically had an accommodation for taking exams. In other words, he could, if it took every kid an hour to take an exam, he would have 2 hours to take it, for example. That's an accommodation.
Time and a half. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So that child was when I was in charge of him, I was told that he was in special ed. Now, I don't know if it's because of the accommodation or not, but
You can have an accommodation for extended time and not be in special ed. You could have a 504 plan and still have
Okay.
accommodations.
So he might not have been in special ed, even though I was told that.
Umbrella term was used. Yep.
Yep. And I will say there also are general ed accommodations that teachers just put into place because they notice a student is struggling that don't have to do with 504s or special education. When a general ed teacher sees that a student is struggling, they will look and see what the reason is and often put in place general ed interventions.
Okay.
So there are a lot of layers before a student gets even to the referral process. All right. Right on to, and then out of district placements. So again, at the time, 322 students in special ed, 5 of those were out of district placements. And then I've listed where those are. So 1.5% at this point. And then just a quick breakdown of CDS. So that's Child Developmental Services. So this is just what we know right now. Referrals are ongoing, but right now, this is where we're seeing students possibly coming in from CDS. So we have students, and a good example of what Lauren was saying earlier is that you'll see that there's for TGS, I do have somebody as a possibility for life skills. Again, nothing is determined until we have transition meetings for these students, but that student does not live in Thomaston.
What about, what's the age? Is it kindergarten, first grade, pre-K? What is it?
For CDS?
For any of them?
For the next year, these students will be in kindergarten.
Kindergarten.
Yep.
So pre-K would not be included in this.
No.
Is there a trend line on this one, Janet? Do you know, like 25 students coming in? It sounds kind of average, but I don't really remember.
You know, I looked at last year and it was fairly close. But then again, you know, the data that I'm seeing where Jess actually captured that data is usually when she was doing presentations to the board. So there's a range of time when that was taken. And even from the time I started putting things together until now, this has gone up by 5 students.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So if I could make a chart, I mean, I think we end up with around the same amount every year, but it really depends on when you pull that, take that snapshot. I can look and see like at, you know, at the start of the year, what we have and do a line from that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And then goals for our special ed department going forward, definitely to increase our capacity to complete student evaluations. That has been an issue this year because when we stopped in-person school last March, even the evaluation process stopped at that point. So all of those evaluations that were in the pipeline to be completed from March into September were in the pipeline and did not restart until school started again this year. So that definitely added to the number of evaluations we would normally do. So we have an open position for a psychological examiner that we definitely are looking to fill. And then we're trying to increase our capacity for, again, we have a half-time teacher that does academic evaluation. So we're looking to build upon that. And then we're doing training with case managers so that they can learn how to better interpret the evaluations to present them at IEP meetings. And also that would be just the academic. For psychological, we'd need to have our psychological examiner there. And also to do some of the eligibility paperwork or do more of it. So that frees our examiners up to do more evaluations. Increasing retention and recruitment. This is an ongoing goal I think we've had for a few years. The difference next year is I'm looking to create an ed tech to teacher program / cohort. So when I moved into this position, there were teachers that were able to move up into the case manager positions at the high school, and there were ed techs that were ready to move up into the teaching positions. So that I think is good for the district when we can actively look for ed techs that are ready to move into that next role and then provide them support getting there. So we were able to look at classes that would be beneficial for them to take and really make sure that when they were ready to become teachers, they were ready to become teachers. And then providing support to them. And then also for retention, that case manager model is definitely important in retaining our teachers and recruiting teachers from other districts.
Yeah, I don't know if John wants to speak to that, but I know he's told us about that a few times. It does help with attracting special ed staff.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just add that we have a really good model, a great department, and I think we do a really good job. Other teachers, special education teachers over the years have told me personally when we hired them that they came here because they know we have a quality program.
Mhm.
So that's what I'll add.
And then also is to just create a more robust transition plans for our 9 through 12th graders. And that goes along well with the goals, the pathway goal at the high school. So it really is, again, case managers play a role in this because they have the ability to look at community resources. Myself and the life skills teachers at the high school are participating in a work group through the state to develop more transition opportunities for our students. And then again, transition planning was on paperwork wise, was in one of our 7 audit items. So that's something we've been working on as a district.
Something so important to the pathways idea is that kids or adults with a learning disability in mathematics or language processing or reading, we help them understand their pathway that takes advantage of the things they're great at, and it does not challenge the things that are really a struggle. That's a game changer. That's a game changer for a lot of kids. I mean, any kid, any person with a disability, it's hardwired into your brain. You can get a lot of help and a lot of coaching, a lot of skills, but finding your pathway in the middle of all of that is just completely awesome. It's just completely
And
awesome.
when they get to 9th grade, we actually add a part to the IEP. So the teachers and case managers at the high school have an extra added piece to that IEP, which is a transition plan, which is discussed at every meeting, no matter what the meeting is, and is a central piece to the IEP, because that transition plan really should drive the IEP once they start 9th grade.
I've worked with adults who really, really struggled with certain things in school, but they're like the best carpenters around. They just have the skill that math class didn't tap into. So I'm just so happy about that. It's just great.
So when you say transition, that's for them to transition out of the high school into
Post-secondary, yep. That's their post-secondary goals and plans. So again, that will look very different from, for example, for maybe a resource room student and maybe a student in life skills. But all high school students have transition plans in their IEP. And again, having the case manager model has helped because the service providers or the teachers will do transition assessments and do things like that in the classroom. But the case managers are able to develop a transition plan and look at outside resources to assist the student. So we had a student who was interested in aviation. We had a case manager at the high school that was able to find some resources about ways that they can maybe take lessons or volunteer at the airport. So really just thinking about what those students' goals are and then developing a program around that.
Thanks.
And then always meeting our legal obligations under special education law, which requires adequate staffing to run programs safely and adequately and adhere to student IEPs. So if a student has a one-on-one ed tech in an IEP, to make sure that we have that. Professional development, I think, really helps in the case of the audit. Because of the professional development that has been provided by the director before me, we only had 7 items on that audit, which is amazing. And so by continuing that, we'll continue to grow our department in that way. And then professional development for case managers on special ed law and best practices, teachers targeted by needs. And then also our website is an incredible resource. And many of the things we have on there are there because they need to be there for legal reasons. So that's also helpful. And I know we have a new website that should be up and running any moment.
Really? Any moment. Oh, cool. I'm gonna do some refresh tonight.
I have to ask Bruce about that.
Yeah.
Any questions about any of this?
I have some questions. Budget numbers. Are we doing that next?
Next.
Okay, I'll wait.
Ta-da! So looking very carefully at our current staffing levels, we have a number of positions that are not a large number. We do have some positions that are open that we definitely need to fill in order to meet our needs for next year. But in addition to that, right now, I only see the necessity of adding 1 ed tech at the life skills program at TGS based on an incoming student from CDS. And then I definitely would love to see if we're able to do Special Olympics That was not something that was in the budget, I believe, this year to have students be able to participate in that. But in terms of staffing, one ed tech.
Are we gonna need to change the building in any way to accommodate the new student? I mean, I asked because I worked on a school that we had to add a shower.
No,
Is this in the status quo budget or not? I'm looking at the page with the personnel and
I do not believe, I think this is in addition to the status quo budget. Is that correct, Pete?
Yes, that's right.
and so is that going to be paid for out of the general fund or the COVID fund? Because we talked about there not being really a lot of changes aside from COVID related money.
We will likely displace some other position to COVID.
So will it be
So-
added to the general fund budget?
The plan is no, the plan is that none of this will be added to the general fund budget. That we're
Yep.
going to work with our different funding streams to keep the status quo budget status quo, although, using those reserves or using contingencies, adding contingencies.
So
So that
assuming that this child's gonna be with us for a while, I mean, we're gonna have to change that at some point.
Things
Change.
change every single year. We're always, I mean, Janet's always going to have to kind of refresh. She's moving staff between buildings, between programs constantly, and that's
Yep.
kind of,
And adjusting. I mean, just because a student needs this level of support this year doesn't necessarily mean that's what they'll need next year.
Any other questions?
I have some were you going to do more on the budget? Janet?
I was going to answer questions, but this is the only thing aside from the status quo budget that I am asking for.
Okay, so if I have some global questions, this is a good time to ask.
It's a great time to ask. I'll actually unshare because I read lips, and so it's very helpful for me to be able to see faces. All right.
All right. And I did turn my light on, so you could probably see it. So the percentage increase is really small this year. It's comparative to what we've been having. It's about 3%. So I'm wondering if you can comment on what's driving a lower increase, particularly just because we're used to seeing much larger increases.
I'm really not sure, Chelsea, if it's because we haven't seen as much movement possibly, because if you look in past years, we've seen a lot of movement into the district and we haven't seen as much of that this year. And so part of that could be people just not moving as much due to COVID. I really couldn't say for sure.
When you created the budget, you said that 10 students left for homeschool. Does the budget assume they're coming back or not?
The budget does not assume they're coming back, but due to the nature of the children's disabilities, we should be able to absorb that if they do.
Okay, right. I remember that's something Jess was really working on, was to create a capacity that
Yes.
would mean we didn't have to make unexpected changes to things like
Yes,
that.
exactly.
that's what this is too. Even so, while we lost the students this year, it's not that easy just to lose the expenses that go with them. So it works both ways.
I have a couple of others, but I'll let other people ask questions first.
So I just have sort of like one thought, and I don't even know if it's a question, but obviously it's a moving. It looks like the number of kids that are coming in and the number of kids that leave the district are relatively the same from what I can see. I don't see any big number changes. Obviously, if we have more kids coming in, we have to hire more staff. But the flip side of that is if we have more kids leave, we should be able to get by with less staff. And the special ed budget is probably the one area where it's some more individualized training and what we do. I don't think I can ever remember a time when the special ed budget went down. I can't ever remember a time. And as you know, we had $1 million increase not long ago. I'm just going to throw this out just because I'm curious. I know a lot of this is done by federal regulation, and the state, I guess, helps with that and tells you what to do all the time. But the logical thing to me would be, if 20 kids graduate out of the program on leave or whatever, we might not need as many instructors for the following year. How would you handle that?
Keep in mind, we have a certain amount of kids. So I think we have 11 students graduating, but we have 25 coming in from CDS. So a lot of it is looking at our staffing very carefully to see if we can shift staff to other areas where they're needed more, so that we're not having to hire new staff. We're just shifting the existing staff to different positions.
And I should know this because I just pick up the advertisements, but I assume there's a fairly high degree of turnover with our staff, correct? Special ed?
Generally speaking, special ed staff has a high degree of turnover, yes.
Yeah, okay.
So I think having that ed tech to teacher program, it would be incredibly helpful for us as a district because we do have some very good ed techs. So if we can prepare our ed techs to step into special ed teaching roles, that's a win for us. It also helps us hire ed techs because they know we have a program like that.
Mm-hmm.
It helps us hire quality people.
Are you recommending a contingency at all? I know I think that may be the next item on the agenda. I can't remember.
I know Pete and I had talked about it. I know.
I'll be recommending probably 3 contingencies. One is special ed, and also a mechanism for what to do with it if we don't spend it.
Yeah, and I definitely think that's a good idea because of this year, we really, I'm basing my numbers on the best projections that I can make, but we really don't know what next year is going to look like. So I think that's a good idea.
And it's probably reasonable to assume that some of the difficulties and even trauma that kids have experienced will show up in special education needs.
And one of the open positions we have is for a social worker that we desperately need.
Well, there's, just to quickly, Chelsea, your point is there's a big chunk of kids who went into homeschool this year and they checked out. So we don't know how they're going to come back and how they're going to be, but we'll just have to wait and see how they're doing.
How do we know they checked out?
When talking to Stephanie the other day, that there's a number of kids who, their parents and them, they decided we're going to study from home this year. And so if they're not responding well to their teachers and stuff, then we don't know yet how they're going to be doing. And I think that that's got to be one of the bigger challenges of any school district in the world, of certainly the country and around here, is that there's a chunk of kids who we're just not sure how they're going to be doing when they come back, assuming they come back to our school district.
Well, for us, that's like 20 or 30 though.
Yeah, I'm still concerned about them. If it's 10, if it's 5, I'm still concerned about them if they've not been really well involved, or even at all.
Having been homeschooled, I think we can be slightly more hopeful, or at least I feel like we don't have any evidence one way or the other. Janet, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say, for special ed students, when we were notified that a student was moving to homeschool, we tried to have an IEP before they left so that we would have a plan for if they would return, how we would address some of those issues.
Right. And I think that it's actually good anytime we have students who are transitioning regular education or not to really have something like that. But okay, so we talked about contingency. Transportation costs, I'm always a little confused about how they work because sometimes they're in the special education budget and sometimes they're not. So can you tell me?
They're always in the transportation budget. They're just coded as special ed, so they are pulled out separately by the DOE.
But when we have our article, like the budget package over here, the transportation is separate. So in that case, the question I have is, what are the special ed related transportation needs that we're including in this year's budget?
Generally, I allocate all of our vans and our van drivers to special ed.
All right, and I'd have to pull that page. But so are we looking at buying more vans? Because I know we've been putting a lot of COVID money into those costs. So how is that working?
We're not buying more vans. We bought 4 Suburbans this year for special ed purposes. So we actually have a stock that we can use. That we're pretty well set with any kind of special ed vehicle needs that we have.
That's great.
So what are this is a line item question, but there's a student transportation vehicles line, and that was one of the ones that I was wondering if that was a special education line. So it sounds like that's something different.
If it's 2,700, it's a regular ed. If it's 2,750, it's special ed.
It is 2,700.
It just differentiates. That's probably a lease on a vehicle. So buses and vehicles are broken out separately by the DOE. So that's why it's not buses. I will say that, the discussion about the social worker, I think for me is a perfect reminder of costs that are truly increasing because of COVID. And it's certainly an area that I think that we'll be able to use a second stream of funding for, as opposed to the general fund for positions that, again, that's going to be kind of how we decide the funding stream for each one of these positions. And it'll change over the year, but I think we'll estimate best we can based on what we know. And that's, I think, partly how we can kind of keep that Article 2 number down, take the increase that we have to with the maintenance of effort to make sure that we are still spending as much or more per special ed student as we did in the prior year, as we're required to accept the grant money. But don't just inflate it for the sake of doing that. I think that we can be smart about it.
Pete, along those lines, I just want to ask you, because I'm looking at the 22 projection. It's up about 12% for the student with special needs, which is quite a bit, really, because if you go from what was approved in 2020, it was 153,000. It hasn't quite doubled, but it's pretty close to double in like 2 years. And that seems like that seems really high to me.
Which line is that?
That's under the transportation and buses. It's got student transportation special needs. What was approved in 2020 was 153,000, and which was actually adopted was 259,000. And then I assume this is what was approved to what's up to June, which is almost a full year. And then for the status quo budget, you have it up 290,000, almost 291,000, up another 12%. That seems awful high, given the fact that we're not going anywhere.
It would just be what I'm capturing in those van drivers. So this is really just a budgeting tool. When I budget people, depending on what the position is, I budget all van drivers and their estimated hours based on a normal year to that 2750, a special ed line.
So, like, in other words, like they're paying benefits.
And I may overdo that a little bit, because that's also a cost that goes into the EPS calculation that we get partial reimbursement on. At least some of those towns do.
Yeah, I mean, I understand about that, but I'm just thinking that's still almost double in like 2 years.
It's coming right out of general ed. It's coming right out of general ed. It's the same people just being allocated to special ed driving as opposed to regular ed driving.
Doug, what line number are you talking about?
It's the one I'm looking at is it's just transportation and buses. It's just a transportation line.
What page?
I don't have a line number to give you.
Oh, okay.
It's on the
Summary sheet.
on this page here.
Oh, you're looking at something totally different than what I'm looking at. Okay.
Yeah, the 21 budget also, if you remember when we went through that, included a huge increase for transportation, because I went through and I actually figured out what we were spending, and we were under budgeting the hours that we're actually using. And a lot of that was because we had drivers that were being used in the summer. We had programs, motion special ed programs being used in the summer, as well as, out of district placements that we had to, account for that weren't accounted for in the prior budget. So part of that was just the overall increase of transportation was capturing the hours properly.
Pete, I'm going to give you a tip if you don't know this already, but to get social workers that we can pay for with COVID money for maybe a couple of years, you can't find them because if they're in private practice or other areas, it's hard to pay them what they can get on their own. But a bunch of students are graduating around May 1st, looking for jobs in agencies. They have to work in an agency for 2 years then to get your independent license. You work under an LCSW. Mm-hmm. They will work for next to nothing because they need to do that. So, but they're going to be gone by the end of May because they're going to be, other jobs will be open up for them. So if you have designs to hire a social worker or 10, with COVID money. You want to get that out there early because they're going to be looking for jobs end of April, beginning of May.
Yes, I have somebody actually from that pool who I'm hoping to fill our position with.
But I think that you're right. I think that we can talk about this later on this week, but I think that we could probably anticipate a couple of different positions that we could probably use.
Oh my God. And yeah, and that's what I'm thinking. There's a bunch of students who would love to have jobs in schools, and they need that kind of job when they graduate.
I have two more questions. So I was wondering, Janet, if you could just give us an update on, Jess was talking a lot about partnering between the special education department and the regular education department. And I don't know if COVID made that more possible or less possible. I was wondering if you could just kind of comment on what's been going on there.
So you mean, are you talking about co-teacher and just working in general, like teachers working together in general?
I think the model is more specifically co-teaching, but I think both are interesting. But I think co-teaching is the one that was the most promising because it allowed us to use teachers concurrently.
So I think that there has been some definite challenges this year that has put that model back slightly in terms of spacing and having to have, if you have two adults in the room and they each have to be 6 feet apart from the students, then you can fit less students in a room. So there are definitely co-teaching models still in place, and we're looking to increase those in the schools next year. Jesse Barkey and I specifically have been talking about co-taught classes. So I think that really is an important model, especially when we're talking about pathways, because the more we can get special ed students into general ed classrooms, the more we can open them up to the opportunities they have for taking other classes. So if you have a replacement class, think of it, if you have 8 spots, and if 2 of those spots are taken up in the resource room, that's 2 spots you can't use to access MCST or art. So we want to give students options to do that wherever we can, and that co-teaching model helps that.
Okay. And my last question, I apologize. I meant to email this over the weekend. So if you guys need to send me an answer to it later, that's fine. But we talked a bit last year about, and as a board, we increased the pay rate for people that we were hiring who are specialists like BCBAs and things like that. And the goal was to see a reduction in the costs that we were paying for hourly people or paying agencies and things like that. And I was wondering what the overall savings impact of that decision was.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to look back at the numbers to see what they were previous to that.
Yeah, sorry, I meant to email and I forgot.
Yeah, I definitely think having our BCBAs in the schools and even having our ed techs, who are trained, is definitely a huge benefit to all of our schools that have them. So,
circling back to a point I just made about not knowing where kids are at, is that logic would say that COVID caused more anxiety and depression, right? Logic would say that more of our kids are suffering from anxiety and depression, which could mean that emotional disturbance, we have a larger percentage of kids falling under that distinction within special ed and or accommodations 504. So that's another way of saying what I was saying a few minutes ago, that we just don't know. And it may affect your program, Janet. It may affect our bottom line. I don't know. I'm not saying it will. I'm not saying it won't. But logic would say. Yeah,
and definitely we can put in place general ed interventions to help those students before they get to needing a referral. I think that's in everybody's best interest.
Yeah, right. And where more social workers, mental health clinicians of any kind could come in handy is to meet the potential incoming need that we can't predict.
So what is the role then of a social worker versus a counselor and a guidance counselor?
Social workers are therapists. Think of it that way. Guidance counselors are academic specialists, academically, typically, and certainly at older ages. But guidance counselors in younger schools, like elementary schools, can be the therapists as well. So
that's why we don't have the social workers in the elementary school.
Because really at the high school, the guidance counselors really are working on academic. They're doing a lot of transition planning with all students, but seniors, and helping them make sure they're in the appropriate programming, finding their pathways, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was thinking we've heard so many presentations from the elementary guidance counselors that are really about providing that emotional support, which I think is something that I'm hoping when we get to COVID, spending discussions we'll hear more about, because I think you're right, Lauren. This is something that we need to provide because, as Janet just said, when we provide the support for every student, it means that we don't necessarily have to provide it in a special education setting.
And definitely if a student needs social work services at the elementary schools, we do have social workers. They just tend to be split between more programs to provide those needs.
I'm going to have to get off here in a few minutes.
I was just gonna say, it's 6:30. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you, Janet, for coming to us.
No problem. If anybody thinks of anything, just pop me an email, or Pete, I guess.
I just want to say, well done, Ms. Cochran. Well done.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This has been an amazing year. We have an incredible staff at RSU 13. It's just amazing to see what our teachers have done and our ed techs.
Well, thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Janet. That was very helpful for everybody.
Thank you.
And Pete, you just have a couple things?
So real quick, I just wanted to kind of introduce the idea of reserve accounts. There's a new legislation that allows RSUs or school districts to set up reserve accounts that typically were not allowed before. The only reserve accounts that a school system could actually set up legally was a capital reserve and a fuel reserve. And these are funds that we use the budget meeting or the voter approval to fund, and then we get their authorization to spend, although the actual expenditures are kind of done at the board level. It limits what you can do with some of the reserve funds. So with this new legislation, it just made sense that we think about possibly setting up some reserve funds over the next few years. One obviously being special ed. One actually, not just building a contingency every year. I think we use the contingency if it's not spent to start funding this reserve, so we can build up an amount that we can have for unexpected costs later on, and be less dependent upon the contingency once we get that built up. The second would be, this is just my thought, is just an overall operations reserve, which would be something for transportation, facilities, and nutrition. These are just extraordinary costs that would not be associated with capital projects that we would see in advance. It could be a boiler going bad or something going on emergency like. The final would be something that I kind of took from listening to something at the state the other day. It was a budget stabilization reserve. So something that we could do each year to put money aside that's actually non-spendable except for that purpose. So currently we would normally use our undesignated fund balance to balance a budget or to minimize or mitigate a tax impact increase that we didn't want. But this would actually formalize the process and make it very apparent and transparent to the public that we do take money if we don't spend it one year and put it aside and have that ability to stabilize tax rates in future years if we so need to. So those are the three things.
I just want to understand that correctly. So what you're saying is if we don't spend the money, we put it into a savings account and we can use it for a future year.
As opposed to an undesignated savings account, we actually designate the purpose of that savings account. So we set up separate savings accounts that have specific purposes that the taxpayers, will allow us to use.
I would favor that over creating new reserve accounts for different things.
That's what it is. It's the same idea. It's the
I think
same
we got
thing.
enough capital projects that we need to do in this district that, if we had money left over, we could fund that. But I would rather try to save money and move it to a different year if that happens. So in a year like COVID, when we're not doing something, if we save 3%, put that in a savings account, that makes all the sense in the world. I'm not big on like taxing Rockport more than they should pay, for example, towards the overall district project.
That's a matter of opinion.
Just letting you know.
Tax Rockport, because that would be fantastic.
Right, but I don't think it's a bad idea to have a savings account or a reserve account. I don't think I want to do it for a specific reason. In other words, not that Janet's on the call, but she's special ed, and somebody else might want something else, and somebody else might want something else. I'm in favor of having a reserve account that we can use for anything, to include lowering the taxes for the people that pay taxes.
Well, I just wanted to kind of float the idea so that when we get into the budget itself, we can discuss that, and these would have to go to the voters to approve us to actually establish them and fund them.
Well, that's my opinion.
Are you looking at like a certain percentage of each of these budgets, or how do you come up with a number?
I haven't yet. This is more just trying to set up a mechanism that we can use in future years. I'm not even sure we could actually fund it the first year.
Couple of questions about logistics. So I know the city has the ability to do reserve funds. So they do something like they have reserve funds for all their capital expenditures, and then the council has to vote to take out like $13,736 to pay for a cruiser and things like that. Is this analogous, or are there some differences that are specific to schools?
It puts it back into the purview of the board, as opposed to having to go out. Theoretically, if we had an emergency expenditure that was not budgeted for, that would put us over a budget, we would theoretically have to have another complete budget meeting and referendum to have the taxpayer authorize that. And because according to the DOE, it rarely happens that process is ever done. They wanted to create a mechanism that allowed the board to do that. So you get the approval at the beginning of the budget season from the voters to establish it, to fund it, and to say, okay, we agree that we will fund the capital reserve fund for FY22 using our undesignated fund balance by $100,000. There's a second article that says we authorize the school to spend up to $50,000 on capital reserve projects for the year. These are what we think we might spend it on, but doesn't mean you have to. So it authorizes the board to spend $50,000 on those projects, or on a project that might come up, or decide not to. So there's still the public input, but it puts the final decision and it puts a mechanism in place that allows the board to actually allocate where those funds go, although the total amount spent is still authorized by the public.
Pete, I'd like to add one thing before we get into the next part, and that is when those emergencies do happen and you have to go out again to the public to get authorization for an over expenditure or an emergency, they're also rarely successful. And I have firsthand experience with in another district with how unsuccessful they can be. Because the last thing the public wants to hear is that you have to again go out and ask for more money for something that you didn't know was going to happen. So just my 2 cents.
So we've had some special ed overages, and we've paid for them by borrowing, which is why we have a negative undesignated fund. Why did we do that instead of going out to voters? Because I'm not sure how this contingency does anything, because if we're just pulling from our undesignated fund, how does this do anything other than let us build a savings account, which I'm not discounting. I just don't understand.
It doesn't change the same. It doesn't really change it a lot, but it just kind of gives us a mechanism to do so, to kind of be more transparent about what we're doing with our money. It's not just some big pool of money that says undesignated fund balance equals this. So I just thought it helps. To me, it helps with the idea of putting a contingency in a budget that you may or may not spend. And I think that's kind of always the question from the public. Is this just a slush fund? Is this just something that you have discretionary, use of? And it's not. We use it if we have to, but if we don't have to, our goal is to put that away to a time that we do have to use it. It doesn't mean that you can't take the special ed reserve and move it to the budget stabilization reserve. It doesn't matter. The money's all fungible. So you're not, but you are just, setting up these pools of money and these reasons to use these pools of money.
Yeah. So if it's a reserve account, we can't move more than a certain amount between budget articles. Why are they allowing a special ed contingency to be used for the boiler.
Basically, what you're doing is you're taking unspent money from the end of the budget year that goes to your undesignated fund balance and moving it. You're not really moving it from the budget. You're not writing a check from that article to that capital reserve. You're actually doing it outside the budget.
I think I'm talking about spending, not budgeting. So let's say we have $50,000 in a contingency for special ed and the boiler goes out and we only have $10,000. So we pull another 10. I don't know how much boilers cost. We pull 10 from the special ed budget. So now we have 20,000. You can't do that.
No.
Okay. That's fine. I'll say I'm tentatively in favor of this. I need to think about it a little bit more, but I think it formalizes something we've been talking about for a while that I think makes sense. So
That's all I've got.
Aloha.
Good night, Doug.
You guys.
Anyone else want to follow Doug's lead?
no, I want to stare at
No.
your books longer.